It was like the mountains circling us poured the fog in and set a kettle lid on top. That grayness came seeping through the walls and into the house too. Bright things like a quilt or button jar lost color and footsteps sounded lonesome. The road curved and the Tilson's farmhouse appeared. A car was parked beside Mr. Tilson's blue pickup. That's Preacher Wynn's car, Daddy said. Probably best just to go on to the field. Daddy eased the truck onto the far side of the road and we got out. Uncle Earl took the butcher knives and sacks from the truck bed and we walked down the slope through a harvested cornfield. Damp stalks and shucks slippery under our feet. The cabbage patch was beside the creek. 2 of the rows had been cut, 4 hadn't. Uncle Earl nodded toward the field across the road. The fog was thicker back here in the bottomland and it took a few seconds to see the tractor. It laid on its side, one big black wheel raised up, the hairless tines like long fingers. He shouldn't have been on a hill that steep, Uncle Earl said. No, Daddy said. But I've known many a man that leastways had a chance to learn from that same mistake. They set down the sacks and kneeled at 2 row-ins. Stay between us, Daddy said to me. We'll cut and you sack. They began cutting, left hand on the cabbage head while the butcher knife chopped underneath. We'll be filthy as hogs by the time we're finished, Uncle Earl said, brushing wet dirt off his overalls. Try to keep your clothes clean, son, Daddy said. I got need for you to do something else when we finish. And, you know, it's kind of interesting because a lot of people don't like Lori as a character. You know, they feel like she's kind of pushy and everything. And she's another character I feel more sympathy for than I think most of my readers do. But it's because I think I've seen that kind of, particularly with my old girlfriend, who just felt like she had to just kind of almost become completely rigid as far as, you know, not making any kind of mistake, just, you know, that kind of fixedness. And so I think that would be interesting to see how their relationship evolves, I think, and see him, you know, I think that would be interesting to see what happens with him. And, you know, he could still fall back. I mean, you know, people do. But I feel good about him at the end, you know, and I think good things are going to happen for him. Hope so. Yeah, y'all may not know this, but I didn't know it till last week. They're starting a film of this.
We've been talking about it.
Yeah, I didn't know it till people knew it before I did. I never, you know, nobody tells me these things. I'm the last person to know. I'm serious. 2 people emailed me and said, well, you know, I heard the, you know, World Made Strikes being made no movie. I said, really? Nobody told me. Yeah.
Because you pull images and concepts and characters from your life and from ancestral memory, do you ever worry that when you're transcribing them into a novel or a story, that you're fundamentally altering the image or your recollection of those things?
No. No, I mean, and the reason is because I'm a fiction writer. You know, I think if I were writing biography or memoir, I would, you know. But I think when someone writes a book of fiction, there's the assumption that you're going to be, you know, altering those things, using something and then discarding other things, and you're after a different kind of truth. I mean, that's you know, you're not after the kind of a truth a factual truth necessarily. You're after a kind of truth that's true to what it means to be a human being, and so those are the differences. But yeah, you know, as I say, I'll never write a memoir. My life is not that interesting. But if I did, I would be much more concerned there. Yeah.
Do you, like, we were asked to think if the book was a correct portrayal of Madison County. Mm-hmm. What do you think on it? Are you trying to just bring out the shadows of Madison County and stress? No,
and I'm not trying to, or you know, I'm definitely not trying to say these are even typical people in Madison County. All I'm saying is that these would be, you know, I'm just saying I think these are human beings I've chosen to write about them, but they're not in any way representative of everybody in Madison County. I think you would agree with me, there are people like this in Madison County, but there are a lot of people who are not like this. So I've taken a group, and I tend to do this. I tend to write about people who are in trouble, because writing about people in trouble is much more interesting to the reader, right? Much more dramatic than, if I write a book about, well, today I went and I had lunch at the the restaurant, then I walked back over and I saw an oak tree and then a blue car passed by. That's boring. Now, if I say a leopard leaped out and clawed at me on the way back, now that's interesting. That's a good attention. So, that's the kind of thing that, you take people in tough situations. You take people very often who are on the edge. And the reason you do that is not just you want to be dramatic, but it's in those moments when people are in life and death situations, when people are on the edge, that they reveal who they are. Think about in your own lives. When have you really known who your friends were? I suspect it's when something went wrong in your life, or something happened in your family, some kind of tragedy, or somebody did something. And that's when people either stand up for you or they don't, right?
So we've discussed your feelings about Leonard. What are your feelings about Carlton?
About who?
Carlton.
Carlton. Carlton, I think, I love villains who have a certain charisma. I like Hannibal Lecter. I mean, not that I like him. I wouldn't want to have dinner with him. But, I think those kinds of villains that are complex are much more interesting. And I think Carlton is that kind. And I think, very often, one thing I like about him is he knows how to play the good old boy role. He's a lot smarter than people think. But, I think. Yes.
I'm sorry if I don't word this right, but the last time that Leonard and Travis have a conversation is, of course, out of the field with the gun,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about how they were on opposite sides historically on the massacre.
Yeah.
And that's their last real conversation with each other, and then Leonard dies. Did that just come naturally, or did you have a specific reason for making that the last conversation? I mean, what was sort of the process there, I guess?
I really wanted, one thing I do believe is that history repeats itself. Now maybe in different ways. I mean, on the surface, but ultimately. And I just thought that as far as the novel, the kind of structure of it would be interesting if, in a sense, that it's almost like that battle is being recreated in the present. And I thought that would be, I thought that would really work, and yet this time it's a little bit different. So to me, it helped with the structure of the book, and also kind of a historical irony, all sorts of things going on, I hope, going on there. Yeah. Yeah.
What was your inspiration to write this book?
What was my inspiration to write this book? Well, the first thing was I love trout fishing. So, it gave me a chance to, do some kind of vicarious trout fishing. I got to imagine it, to go back, because when I was growing up, I loved to fish the very isolated streams where, at least when I was growing up, they called them speckled trout or specks. I guess, a lot of people call them brook trout. But I loved to go up those streams. And a couple of times I actually went up streams where there were marijuana plants. And I backed out and got out of there. And one time when I was really young, my uncle and I came up on a still in Watauga County, and we got out of there, even though it's probably one of my relatives. But I'd been 17 and maybe a little bit, taking a kind of risk that I would have maybe at 16 or 17, I wouldn't at 25. I mean, I wouldn't have done it anyway, but it was easy to imagine somebody 16 or 17 not thinking that thing out, how dangerous it would be. So I thought it'd make an interesting story. But also, I've always wanted to write about Shelton Laurel Massacre, because I actually had ancestors involved in that fight, or in that massacre on both sides. And, so that's always haunted me. And I thought it'd be an interesting chance to kind of deal with that. And also because what happened in Madison County in 1863, I think, is something that we see again and again all over the world. We've seen it in Rwanda, we've seen it in Germany, we've seen it Kosovo. Again and again, to me, it's one of the most disturbing aspects of human nature, is that you can grow up and live with people in your community for generations and suddenly turn on them with this absolute ferocity. And that's very disturbing to me, that could happen. So, what I've done is I thought that would be a way of, writing about what I would consider a major issue, but putting it in a very local, situation. The kind of writer I am, sometimes I've been called a regional writer, which I find, on one hand, accurate, but on another hand, inaccurate, because sometimes it implies that I'm only writing about, say, Madison County or Watauga County or the western North Carolina mountains. But Eudora Welty once said, "One place understood helps us understand all other places better." And so what you're trying to do, when you're writing about one particular place, if you're a serious artist, is you're using that place to describe every place, to get at the heart of every place. James Joyce does this with Dublin. I mean, James Joyce is as regional a writer as you could imagine, Other writers, Philip Roth, writes about New Jersey. That's a place, I'm always amused when New Yorkers, act like I'm a regional writer, but they're not, New York is a place, and great writing can come out of there. I love Richard Price, who writes so well about New York City, but I would say I'm no more regional than he is, ultimately.
Yeah, the epistolary nature of the doctor's ledger, was that inspired by something real that you'd seen or done?
The letters in the book, I made those up. But what I did was I did a huge amount of research on 19th century medicine. I also did some research on Civil War medicine, obviously. And I just thought that would be kind of an interesting way for him to tell his story. To reveal himself and where he was, and in a way set up a kind of parallel between his journey and Leonard's journey. It's really interesting how many American novels, so many of the great American novels kind of, and I'm not saying mine is, but very often they can incorporate that kind of thing where one story is kind of running parallel. If you've read Robert Penn Warren's All the King's Men, that's one of the best examples of what I'm talking about, because you have cast masters' journals kind of doing the same thing. But even in novels such as, say, The Great Gatsby, there's a kind of, interesting kind of, the story is not as much about Gatsby as it is about Nick, so there's very often there's kind of a parallel line running through. I hope that would be interesting to the reader. And the other part of it is that everything in there is true as far as the kind of medicines that they were using. I was very careful about getting those things right, as far as how would you treat a broken leg? How would you, those kinds of questions. Yeah, and I got to have some fun. I've got a good friend, a writer named George Singleton, and I have a character in the doctor's journal named Georgina Singleton who has ringworms. So that was kind of fun, to put him in there. Yeah.
What inspired you to start writing, and when did you start writing?
Yeah. What inspired me to start writing? Well, I didn't write in high school or elementary school like a lot of my friends. I've got friends who were writing novels when they're 8 years old. Lee Smith, as a matter of fact. I think Lee said she finished a novel when she was 8. But I didn't do that. I didn't even try to write. I love to read. But when I got into college, I just kind of got more and more interested in it. I love to read. And I thought, like the same way I felt about music, after a while you want to try it. And I tried the guitar, had no talent for it. So then I gave up on that and tried writing. And it went very slowly. For a long time, I didn't write well, but finally, after a few years, maybe 5,000 hours of bad writing, I kind of started to write some things that maybe not want to throw up. Yeah.
Throughout the book, you kept using the saying, "A knit makes a louse." Where
Yeah.
did you get that saying from?
That was actually said at the Cheltenham Massacre. Yeah, that was said there because when they were killing, that was the justification for killing children, because, they would grow up. So that's actually historically a term that was used, yes. Yeah.
I was wondering your thoughts on how Madison County was when the book, at the time in which the book was set, and how it is now. Do you think it's really changed?
Yeah, I think it's changed some. I mean, I think the opening up of the 4-lane highways has will make a difference, and I'm not completely happy about that. I mean, I think there's, I think Madison County has, I'd hate for it just to become a kind of retirement home, I would love to see, personally, I would love to see organic farming start to take hold there, and that kind of lifestyle still last. I don't know that it can, but yeah, I think it's going to change. I think it's changing, don't you? I mean, you're there. I mean, you feel like it's a lot less rural than it was in the 70s. Y'all weren't around in the 70s, but I was, and it's changed a lot since then. And in some ways good, some ways maybe not always as good. I think what I've seen happen with my own family, not in Madison County, but Watauga, is that for my family in Watauga, the property, once the property prices went up really high, the tax rates went up, and that was really tough for some of my relatives to pay their taxes, particularly the ones who were farmers. They weren't making a lot of money. And sometimes when things like that happen, there are unforeseen consequences.
I've read almost all your novels. I'm halfway through the code, and Serena strikes me as a very different kind of character than the kind that you usually write about. So can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think she's very different. She's not from, she's not native to the area. She's from Colorado. A lot of people forget that sometimes, but she's from Colorado. So she has been outdoors, obviously. But yeah, that book, I wanted that book to do a very different thing than what my other books have done. I really wanted it to feel like an Elizabethan play. And actually, the novel actually starts with at the train station on the platform, and I wanted it to feel almost like it was, the stage, because you have these characters kind of come up on it, and it starts from there. And obviously, there are other devices that play off Elizabethan and also Greek theater. But I wanted it to feel more epic, and I wanted it to be an attempt at a kind of Ayn Randian character and the consequences of what that can lead to, as well as just writing about what I think was one of the most amazing pieces of Western North Carolina history, the building of the Smoky Mountains Park, which was an amazing accomplishment because it was done during the Depression. And there were consequences, people forced off their land, and I noted those as well. But I just thought it's very different, you're right, absolutely. To me, it was my big novel. It's kind of the most ambitious novel I've written.
I believe you said in an interview that you write 10 to 14 drafts of each novel.
Yeah.
Did you start this, was this practice in place from your first novels? And how did you keep up the level of dedication it took?
Well, that's a good question. How can you stay sane and write 10 or 14 drafts of 10 to 14 drafts of a novel? It's hard to stay sane. And somebody asked me what it was like. I said it's like being a mule. It really is. You just have to. It's like if you've ever seen a mule with a blind. You just have to go down that one road, and you can't look at the 1,000 more roads that you got to go. And you just have to figure I'm gonna do, I probably average 6 hours a day writing. So, I just figure I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna put my head down, and I'm gonna write for 6 hours. And when I get it, my first draft is always terrible. And if your teachers tell you need to do drafts instead of, this is why they're telling you this. For me, a first draft is merely like having a big ugly goblet of clay. I'm just slapping something down on the page. A lot of it's probably not going to work. I don't even worry too much about whether it, it fits that well. I'm just trying to get something to work with. And but as I go through the drafts, usually like first draft of a lot of novels. Well, like The World Made Straight, probably the first draft of 100 pages. And from there, second draft maybe goes up to about 130. Then, I kind of just gradually build. Then I end up cutting 100 pages. And then, it's kind of a back and forth. But as I get deeper into the book, the thing I really start looking at is the language. I want the language to be as vivid and concise as possible. And as I get to the last couple of drafts, I'm mainly just as much listening to the sound of the consonants and vowels rubbing up against each other, stressed syllables as opposed to unstressed. And, those are not things I don't want the reader to be scanning my, say, oh, but what I do hope is that the reader hears a kind of rhythm. When you read a book and it feels smooth, you feel like it's not bumping the sentences. That's what you're going for. You want it to feel smooth and even, the language.
Speaking of which, I felt like in a lot of places the cadence of your language really did give dimension to, in several cases, the landscape itself. Which brings me to the question, something Leonard brings up. He glosses in words, but he kind of embodies as a character this notion of landscape as destiny. I'm wondering if you can unpack that a little bit, because I feel like it plays itself out in different ways throughout the book, but it could be elevated to even a philosophy or a worldview in itself. How do you feel about that concept?
Well, I think that I'm fascinated with how geography, landscape affects us psychologically. It affects us in very real ways. If you do live in a high mountain cove, whether it's in Switzerland or North Carolina, you are going to be in many ways more isolated than you would be in a flat open area. That's just the way it is. But it's going to affect all sorts of things. What crops you can grow? Can you have a plantation? No. Those kinds of. But ultimately, I think what you're interested in is psychologically. And what I've found very interesting about people who grow up in the mountains, and this is mainly from my own family, is that it can be both positive and negative. The positive part is that very often if you live in the mountains, you feel protected. It's almost like the mountains are like a room that protects you from the outside world. And that's very nourishing. I know that when my relatives would leave to work in textile mills, they always saw the mountains as home, but they never envisioned a place that, wasn't the mountains as being home. And I think that is very, very, I think the landscape does that in an interesting way. But it also, I think, can be a constant reminder of how small we are as human beings. That these mountains are always reminding us, they've been here millions of years. Our lives are very fleeting. We are so insignificant. And I think that, and I've seen it in my family, so I'm just talking on my family, but I've had a lot of friends whose families have been in the mountains a long time who say the same thing, that there's a kind of fatalism, that you feel so small and unimportant that it's almost like, well, I can't stop this mountaintop removal. I can't, those kind of just almost acceptance of things and not being able. So I find that very interesting, and it's been interesting. The books have been translated into 12 languages now, and I get letters from people from other mountain cultures who talk about this, and I think that's it's kind of interesting to see that. And I'm also fascinated, though, for what does it mean to grow up in the Midwest, to have that kind of expansiveness. I would argue that Gatsby is the quintessential Midwestern character because he can see out. Almost anything could seem possible. You can look out for miles. You know, the possible is so expansive. What does it mean to live next to an ocean or be an island people? You know, one thing that's interesting about, if you study cultural geography about people who live on islands, is that manners are incredibly important. And the reason is you can't get away from people. So if you act like a jerk, you know, somebody's going to be there. You know, you're going to bump into that person sometime probably later. So, I mean, all those things I think are to me, are very fascinating. And certainly landscape is destiny. In this novel, you know, that idea that Leonard's kind of trapped here in some ways, to me, was interesting.
Have you started on your next novel, or do you have any ideas?
No, I haven't. You know, I'm so burned out on novels right now. I don't know that I'll ever write another. You know, they're just so, you know, every time I write one, no matter if it's short or long, it's 3 years for some reason. And I can't get away from it once I start it. I mean, I think about it every day. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. It's a horrible ordeal to go through. And every time I finish one, I tell, you know, I get my friends to promise to kill me if I start another one. And fortunately, they haven't done that. But it's just a horrible thing to do to yourself. Here I am. I'm really helping out the cause. but I would say this. I mean, but you know, the great thing is once you finish it, that's fun. You know, when you get the book, because you can look and you look at it and you think, you know, wow, you know, I created this world, and you know, there's some people that are reading this book and you know find that world interesting. And that's a wonderful thing. I mean, I love looking at them on my shelf. Or the day when the first day the book arrives, I'm always so excited. I'm like a kid at Christmas, you know, just tear open the box just to see it, you know, to hold it. But it's tough. But and I love writing short stories. So right now, you know, like this is actually the last thing I've written, really.
I got a question about something you said in answer to her question about how Madison County is different from the 70s. You said it's different, it's got a lot of highways, which you don't really like because you don't want it to just be an old folks home. So do you have this idea that with an end to, like, how do you say less isolated? With them, I guess Madison County becoming less isolated, you just assume like a lot of people are going to leave and only the old people will stay?
Oh no, I'm talking more about retirement. You know, and then I did it. You know, you'll have huge retirement communities, and it'll become just more like, you know, tourism and I'm not trying to sentimentalize it, because I'll tell you, anybody's done farming, that's not an easy life. It's a lot more. I'll tell you a funny story. My aunt, I was working on the World Main Strait. I'd done some work with tobacco when I was young with my uncle because he had a tobacco crop, but she had lived it. I mean, you know, I just did it when I was happened to be around, but I was asking her a couple of questions about hanging tobacco because I'd forgotten. And she kind of looked over at me and she said, because if you've ever done it, you know, it's a nasty job. You know, that rosin gets on your hands. Yeah, it's a tough job. But she kind of, you know, I've been asking her a couple of questions. She kind of looked over and smiled. And she said, you know, it's a lot easier to write about it than do it. You know, and it is. I mean, that's hard, nasty work. And so, you know, I don't want to sentimentalize that life. And I suspect, I don't know, probably I'd be surprised if 2 or 3 of y'all will end up being farmers. You probably won't, right? And I didn't go that way. You know, I thought I might when I was young, but I didn't. Because it's almost impossible to make a living. You know, tobacco was about the last money crop you could really make a living on stuff.
Ron, on your thoughts of Serena on the back burner before you really got into it. After reading that and thinking about the history of the Haywood County and what a part Champion Paper applied, is a lot of what you thought about parallel that mill.
Yeah, well, I mean, just not so much just the, you know, what I saw as far, you know, Champion was involved in that during the 30s and 20s, you know, with the park. And, you know, that brings up one of those complex questions. There's no easy answer for. You know, I think we all know Champion and what happens when the Pigeon River goes past the paper mill. But you know, if you got a job, you got 3 kids, and you're working in that mill, it's a lot easier for somebody like me who's outside of it. And I think those are the kind of tough questions that we have to ask, you know, as this region changes. You know, same thing with, you know, I've got a couple of friends who cut timber, you know, for a living, and that's a tough job too. And you know, there are people that say, well, we should never cut another tree. Well, you know, those people need jobs too. You know, they need a living. And so these questions are always tough. And I think, but yeah, you know, Champion was involved in that. You're absolutely right. And I actually, when I was doing research, I read about, you know, they sold off a good bit of land to the national park. And obviously they kept some too.
I was just curious, how much, in terms of like your books, like The World Made Straight, how much do you have control over what the books like look like on the cover? I remember before we started reading this and during it, like, I just remember noticing this looks awfully flat.
Yeah,
for mountain
yes,
region.
you're absolutely right. It's not Appalachia. No.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of control, but I mean, as far as the covers, but I'm starting to, I mean, I'm getting, since I'm becoming a little, I don't know, my profile's a little higher now, I have more. And actually, the last cover, I just followed them because they were just going to do another kind of stereotypical rusty truck, you know, with flat tires. And I finally said, look, we're going, let's just pretend I'm a pretty good short story writer. And just imagine, don't think about where I'm from or anything. And that's what, yeah, they came up with this, which I love. It's my favorite cover. But I mean, it's in a way very simple, but it's, I think, very striking, particularly if you can see how the tree kind of moves when it hits the light. I love this cover, but they were going to put a, you know, rusty truck on it, and you know. I mean, I have a rusty truck. It's parked in my front yard, but you know, I do have another car. Yeah.
Have you addressed foreshadowing? Like, I like to write
Yeah.
every once in a while, but I have a hard time like trying to get that link.
Yeah, foreshadowing. I think that you know, to me it's important. It kind of prepares the reader, and I don't think you want to make it heavy-handed, but you do want it to be there. I think what I love to happen in a novel or a short story is when you get to the end, and at first you're surprised. And then you start thinking back over the book, and you realize, well, I should have seen this coming. You know, because the foreshadowing has kind of set it up. And that, to me, is when a book really works, you know, when it can do that. But, yeah, I mean, I think you want to kind of set up things. You want, you know, I think, in a way, because of the emphasis on the battle, that you shouldn't be completely surprised that the novel ends, you know, with a kind of almost like a battle like that again. I mean, that should be surprising in some way, but in another way, the novel's structure and emphasis has kind of led to that, I would think, you know, in some ways at least. Yeah.
We've got time for a few more questions. You'll have.
Yeah.
Now that you have books that are being turned into movies, one, what's it like letting go of that freedom? And then two, has that changed the way you're writing in the future?
Yeah, the questions about movies, whether you mean it's changed as far as what? I mean,
well, I guess knowing that you might relinquish a lot of freedom.
Oh yeah.
Once they're making a movie, does that?
I see what you're saying. Yeah. That, you know what happens, and this is you're exactly right. Once you sell the rights to your movie, they can pretty much do anything they want to with it. I mean, you just have to. If you sign a contract, you take the advance money, you made your deal with the devil. And you can't complain, of course you will, if you don't like the movie. But the good thing about it is that even if the movie isn't what I would have wanted to be, I hope it will bring readers, very often it'll bring a lot of readers to the book that wouldn't have noticed it either, you know, anyway. And, you know, also, I have to admit, you know, it's kind of nice thinking that the novel, there's a sense that there's enough of a story in this that it could translate into film. To me, it's a translation. You know, it's not that they're trying to recreate your novel. It's a kind of translation into film, into images. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, the cast is really good. You know, Bradley Cooper has become a really good actor. You know, if you've seen Hangover, you know, that's not the limits of his acting ability. No, I thought that movie was pretty funny. But, you know, I think that these are good people involved. Suzanne Beer, who's directing, the Danish director, is incredibly good. I don't know if y'all seen The Better World. It won Academy Award. It is the best foreign film. So. And some of the secondary actors are really good. Toby Jones, who was in Harry Potter and in The Hunger Games as well. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. He's good. You'd recognize his face. You will recognize it. Reese Ifans was in the last Spider-Man. So that's, yeah, I think it's a good video. But, you know, as far as the future, you know, I never write with the idea that this could become a movie. But I think what I do try to do is to make the scenes, maybe cinematic's the wrong word, but really visual. I mean, I want my readers to see the places I'm describing, to see the characters, very clearly. So that's important, and I'll continue to do that.
You've written about so many historic events that have such tight ties to our region in a lot of your work. Is there any historic event you haven't covered yet that you really want to hit, or am I totally
Historical, you mean in Western North Carolina?
Yeah.
A historical event in Western, I'm sure there are plenty. I mean, there are plenty. That's always kind of a tough question. Actually, a couple within my own family, a couple of stories that are pretty amazing. During the Civil War, and also later, you know, some family history that I think makes some good fiction. I mean, once again, you know, like you said, I would change a good bit, but yeah, there's some stories. Actually, there's a really interesting story about my great uncle who, when he was about 20, there was kind of you wouldn't call it a bar, and it was, you know, because it was illegal, but a place where young men would go. And he and his best friend got drunk and they were playing Russian roulette. And my great uncle shot the guy. Best friend killed him. They were just, you know, roaring drunk. They didn't know what they were doing. And he left. This was near Boone. He left and went out to the Midwest. And he came back, I think it was 40 years later. His mother was really old, and his mother was probably almost 80. And he came back and he came in the door and she didn't know who he was. And on one hand, you see how that was, but to me that was just so striking, you know. But I mean, and to me what was interesting, what would make him go into exile that long and what would bring him back? And I don't know, I may never write that story, but that story has been one that I thought, you know, there's something going on there that I find interesting. Yes.
I wonder how you came to know about the Shelton Massacre. Was that something, a story that your family had talked with you about, or was that purely through research, or?
It was told in my family. So I'd heard about it from family members. So, you know, a lot of people up there don't talk a lot about it, and they didn't for a while because, you know, these were people that knew each other. That was a traumatic, incredibly traumatic event. But yeah, you know, I'd heard a little bit about it, and then I really started doing serious research on it, and it became even more interesting. And you know, when I actually found out that one of my ancestors who'd been up in that area during that time was a doctor, Dr. Candler. And, you know, if you know Candler, that's named after the Candler family. So, you know, all of that just became more and more interesting. And I will tell you this: have any of you ever been up to the gravesite? Okay. Well, I don't know if you had this feeling. I went up there on a very sunny, calm day. And, you know, I say it in the book, you know, I say that there are places that feel more real than you are. I mean, when I went there, I just felt like something happened here. I could just feel it. Now, maybe that's just me bringing it with me, I know. But that place just... There's something about that place, knowing that there are 13 bodies right there, that little simple stone that I find incredibly haunting and powerful. And going into that place, it felt that way. And in the meadow too, you know. But for some reason, where they're buried, I just felt that in a way, even more so than in the field, where they were shot.
I have sort of a strange question. I told some friends that I was coming to see you speak, and they said, oh, you have to ask him about the code. And I apologize, I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
But apparently there is a part in the code where you have the French Broad River running in the wrong direction.
Mhm.
And people who know Madison County are all wound up about it, because obviously you research everything
Yeah.
very thoroughly. So I was just wondering what your take was. Was that a hard thing to do?
It's just you miss things, you forget things, and yeah, that was one where just tell them sheer stupidity. And you always get something wrong. So tell them that I apologize. Or no, tell them in 1918 there was just 1 year where it did. The minute it's blood, it just changed, the river just shifted and kind of, went back up.
Dozens of really good stories, and they remember one.
Yeah, I know, and that's so funny because I get letters all the time, because when you do that kind of research, you always get some, and that one I am a little embarrassed by, because I should have got that right. But, you miss things, and but there's always somebody to let you know.
That's the first thing I heard about.
Yeah, well, tell them I'm very sorry.
The last question.
My ancestors would be ashamed of me.
There are a lot of people in this room I know who are aspiring writers, or who want to write or thinking about writing. What advice do you have for us?
Well, I think certainly read as much as you can. I mean, that's how you learn to do it. You read the best writers. Don't just read writers that you think you want to write like. I mean, read writers who are doing very different things. Just every writer I know who's any good is a voracious reader. So that to me is the most important thing. The other thing, two other things I would say is, one is just you can't tell early on how good you are. I mean, if you'd seen probably the first 4 or 5 years of my writing, you would have said, this guy will never be any good at this. And I'm not trying to be modest here, it's true. And I knew it was bad. That's what made it very discouraging. I knew I wasn't writing well. But I think you have to, there are more people who could be really good writers than become good writers, because so many of them give up. So I think you have to be willing to put in a lot of time and just keep learning your craft. Don't worry about being published. Just write and write well. And I'll tell you the one way you'll know if you're going to be a writer, if you really are a writer or not, and that is you can't not write. You can't not write. I mean, there's going to be something that's going to prod you the rest of your life. And when I got about 28, I was I got to a point in my life where I've been writing, but I've been in a kind of way, I was pretty serious about it, but I really hadn't made that real commitment that you have to make. And I just thought about it one day, and I thought, okay, I'm about 28 years old now, and do I want to live my life where I'll look back 40 years from now and wonder, could I do this? Or would I rather risk maybe 20 more years and finding out you have no talent for it? And I decided that I would rather know than not know. Even if the risk was I spent hours and hours for the next 2 decades, or however, maybe the rest of my life trying to write when I couldn't do it. So I think, you'll know. But it's, there's something, it's very hard, but there's something amazing about it. And when it works well, when it's really going well, there's not a better feeling on earth. When you really get your groove going. When I was writing Serena, I was writing sometimes 10, 12 hours a day. And it was just like it was just coming. And I mean, it was exhilarating. It was like being on a roller coaster. It was just, this feeling you're almost being swept away. And you don't, you know, you don't get that a lot, but when it happens, oh, you know, that's bliss. It really is. It's I don't know. It's a transcendent state, and so maybe a few years we'll have a couple of novels from you, and you'll even have the French Broad River in the right place. Thank y'all.
Were you really upset when you were writing this, or was this just what you were talking about earlier as far as like drama goes?
It's drama, yeah. I mean, you put people in really tough situations, and you know, you just see what happens.
And you beat the crap out of them some more. I figured you must have been like had a horrible divorce in your life or
No,
something.
no, I'm a happy guy. You know, it always surprises people, but I mean, I think I am.
It's entire. I didn't realize I had this with me. Would you
Okay.
sign it too?
Sure,
Do you
sure,
mind?
sure. It's Erin.
It is Erin. And Anisha wanted to say hello as well.
Yeah.
She did a project with you years and years ago.
Yeah, right. I remember we did. Yeah, y'all built the kind of.
Yeah. I stole my granny's wind chime things. She had fish on them, and I put them on.
I remember. Yeah, because we all got a picture together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good to see you again. You've grown up.
Miss Seymour told me to tell you hi.
Okay. Well, tell her hello for me too. Yeah, that was a fun day. When
Oh
we did
yeah,
that.
that was a blast.
Good. I wish I had a book being signed, but I wanted to say thanks for coming, and it was really wonderful hearing
Well, thank
you
you.
speak. It was beautiful.
Well, thank you.
But I just wanted to ask, because you said that you write sometimes 10 to 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, like, how you get through that when it's tough, and when you get writer's block, or if you do something to make that a little more enjoyable.
No,
make
actually,
it easier to write. Or?
You know what I do? Very often, if I'm stuck, I read a lot. Sometimes that kind of inspires me. You know, I go back and read some books I like. But the other thing I do is that when the writing's not going well, and you want to call it writer's block, you know, whatever, where you're frustrated because nothing seems to be coming.
Yeah.
I make myself go, you know, wherever I write, and I make myself go in, and I don't check email, I don't do anything else, and I just sit there. And sometimes I'll sit there 2 hours and nothing will happen. I mean, you know, in a way it's almost like I'm punishing myself because I'm not writing. But almost always what will happen is I'll sit there 10, 15 minutes, and then just a little, you know, it's almost like fishing, you know, get a little nibble. and some of the days that, you know, very often that's the way I break through. But, you know, there are times when, you know, particularly, you know, with a novel, I know something's wrong and I can't quite figure out what it is, and sometimes I have to wait several months for it to figure it out. So I think it's just being real patient. But I do think it's important to try to write every day because it becomes such a natural part of your life.
Yeah.
You know, I think one thing that makes writing so hard for people is that, you know, if you only do it, say, once a week, you know, that it's unnatural. I mean, but if it becomes part of the rhythm of your day, like exercising or something, I think that makes it easier. And I do, you know, I was on the road. I've been in 8 cities in last 8 days, 8 different cities, but I made myself write in a hotel room every day for, you know, 2 to 4 hours. You know, just got to get the work done.
That's amazing. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.